My name is Nancy Dillette, and I'm an academic associate at Arizona State University and an oral historian. And today is March 25th, 2005. I'm joined by Noel Stowe. He's chair of the history department at Arizona State University and director of the public history program. And together we're continuing to interview Arizona City County Management Life members for the ACMA Oral History Project. Today, we're in the living room of Lloyd Harrel, who worked in city government in Colorado and Missouri and Texas, and finally served as city manager for the city of Chandler, Arizona, from 1995 until 2002. Trey Evans of Skyline Video Productions is here with us, taping the interview. And we're documenting the history of life members in order to share the values and principles of people who created the city council manager form of government. And this is interview number 8. So let's begin with the very early story for you, and tell us where and when you were born.
I was born in Denver, Colorado, May 13th, 1944.
Tell us a little bit about your childhood there and bring us up to the time where you've begun to think about entering into the profession of city management.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. I was, as I said, born in Denver and raised between my early years in Golden, Colorado. My father was a lead man for Coors Brewery, and so we lived in Golden for a while, and then later moved to Denver, West Denver, and that's where I did most of my schooling. Went to West Denver High School, and following that, went off to William Jewell College in Liberty, Missouri, and received my BA in political science, studying there. And then following that, went to the Fels Institute of Local and State Government at the University of Pennsylvania, and received a Master of Governmental Administration degree. And my interest, I guess, in city management began when I was at William Jewell, and I was a political science major. Thought at that point that I wanted to go on to law school. That was kind of the goal. But I got exposed to the council manager form of government. I did a little brief internship with the city of Kansas City, Missouri. Learned about city managers really for the first time during that exposure, and that really whetted my interest, I think, because I was a person that always liked policy development and knew that I would enjoy governmental service. On the other hand, I had no desire to run for office and be, quote, a politician, unquote, and so city management profession was an ideal mix for that allowed you to really be involved in policy, really do things to make a difference, but not have to put up with the headaches of running for office. Mm-hmm. And that was very appealing to me. And so at that point, this was really between my junior and senior year in undergraduate school. At Jewell, we really didn't have, because it's a small school, about 1,400 students, and the political science staff there was not completely up to date on the latest in local government, but there was another school that was close by, Park College, which was in Parkville, Missouri, and in fact, I did a few courses there. There was a reciprocal agreement between the two schools, and so I did some public administration courses there and so forth. And there was a fellow there by the name of Jerzy Hauptmann, who was pretty big in ASPA, American Association for Public Administration. And so I went to him, and with the real request, you know, could you give me, if you just had to pick out 10 schools across the country that if I really wanted to be a city manager, I should really consider and try to go to those schools. And he did, and that provided the list that I used to send out applications for graduate school immediately after graduating from Jewell, and I selected the Fells Institute, which is part of the Wharton School of Business, and received my master's there.
Can you go back a little bit? And
Sure.
if you can recall,
Okay, just 1 second before we.
something's
There's
come
nothing
on.
wrong with it. Just two real small things. Let's
Okay.
scoot both of you as closer to the camera as we can.
Okay,
It's just a little bit
So he's
profile
looking-
when he's looking at you.
okay.
And then I'm going to adjust this just a tiny bit because we're seeing it a little bit in his glasses.
Okay.
Okay.
I wondered if I detected I'm from the Philadelphia area.
Oh,
Do I
really?
detect some Philadelphia sounds?
I wasn't there
You're
very long.
not there long enough, okay. All right.
Don't think so.
I thought there were some A's that
Oh, really?
sounded familiar.
Maybe it had
Tom.
more of an influence than
Maybe
I
you had
thought
more
on it,
hoagies
see.
and steak sandwiches than you
That's
realized.
right, that's right.
2 more seconds and then I'm done
Sure.
doing the paint.
That's okay.
Yeah, my ears still pop up when I hear hoagie sandwiches. Really Philly cheesesteaks and,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
And you know you can't transport those. People
Right.
have tried
I
a
know.
lot of places.
I know, it just doesn't.
You
I
wanna
always,
switch
I always
spots?
walk in and I say, have you ever been to Philadelphia?
Yeah,
And these
right.
kids are like, no.
Do you want to switch places, and then he would look more at you and more
Oh,
at the
do you want us
camera?
to switch?
Why don't we do that?
Who's going to be doing more of the questions?
I tend to ask a lot of questions.
Okay. Then yeah, probably.
Okay. Yeah, I always go and try the Philly
Uh-huh.
steaks. I
Right,
mean,
right.
why not?
Sure, sure.
But
Okay.
they don't really know what they're talking about. Okay, so if you can recall, tell us just a little bit about the internship with the Kansas City, Missouri experience, and whether
Right.
that was sort of a required thing, and what kinds of things you experienced there, because it seems like it was a bit instrumental in your decision-making.
Yes, it was, but it was not an extensive type internship. I got to spend, as I recall, it didn't make a real impression on me as far as the type of work, but I got to spend just a couple weeks and more than anything learn about the council manager form of government and what they were doing. It certainly wasn't extensive, but it was enough to really say, hey, this is something that really makes sense, I think. And I've studied about it in school and so forth, but
You're seeing it in
seeing
action.
it in real action.
Was there
Right.
anything particular that you can recall that you actually saw a process that made you sort of understand in an experiential way that,
Not, Nancy,
Specifically.
truly not that I can recall. I mean, it was more the overall exposure and not one single
Uh-huh.
event that said, oh yeah, this is something I really want to do. I think that came later in some of my experiences, obviously, but not right at that point.
okay.
Did it lead you later on to help develop internships when you were?
Well, it certainly did that, and I think more than that, as part of the program at Fells, it was a program in which we were there for 12 to 15 months. I think I had to stay over and do a little Wharton catch up in accounting. But you were there at the school during that point, and then went off to a 6-month internship, which was very structured, and we had to send papers back and so on and so forth. And I think that exposure more than anything really prompted my interest in really knowing the value of a good internship experience.
And where did you go at that point?
Well, at that point, I went to Boulder, Colorado. I worked in the city manager's office, and there's a great story about that I like to tell, because I tell this to young people because I think it's so important. The Fells program at the time was really one of the premier programs in the country, and it was a program in which we were talking about the Hall name. Well, this was Samuel Fells, who was a famous soap
Fells
manufacturer in the Philadelphia area, had endowed this program fairly substantially. And so what they were able to do is to pick out about 30 students from across the country that had applied to go into the program. And if you were selected, the first thing that happened is that all the tuition was waived for you to go to Fells. And University of Pennsylvania is an Ivy League school, so it was, even back then, fairly substantial, and certainly something I couldn't have afforded on my own. And so the first thing that happened is that you got the tuition waiver. And then the program, you were there for a semester, and then they took half the class based primarily on academic performance, and the half that was selected then got a $150 a month stipend on top of the tuition waiver. And so that continued, and so it was a wonderful program, and you were around people that had a similar interest in state and local government. You worked very hard. We went to school. Well, we had a formal internship during the morning where we went to 3 different places during our year there at Fells, and then the afternoon was devoted to classes, and then nights you did all your work and so on and so forth. And there was a lot of grumbling about that by the students. As you can imagine, we all came in and thrown through this pace, and I understand this happened every year. We had a visit from the director of the program that called everybody together after about 3 weeks and proceeded to tell us that if we couldn't stand this level of work, we had no business thinking about going into city management, because we would work a lot harder than this when we got out there. So this reinforced it. But to go back to the internship, the other unique thing about the program is the director of this program was kind of a legend still, by the name of Steve Sweeney. And Steve had these contacts throughout the country. And so one of the things about our internship that I tell young people was so important for me is, first, there were a couple of rules. The first rule was the government in which you were selected to do your internship could pay you no more than $300 a month, which even back then was pretty skimpy wages. But they had to agree to it. And the reason that was articulated to us is that Sweeney wanted you to pick the place that you went to do your internship, not based upon how much money you could make, but based upon the quality of the experience that you would get and what it would do for you later in your career. And so that was one rule that helped that. And then the second rule was that, and this was a wonderful advantage that I had that a lot of young people don't have today, and I recognize that, but Sweeney had these contacts throughout the country, and so what would happen is you could bring into Sweeney, when we got ready to be placed, the names of 3 cities in which you would like to do your internship. And they could be in no order, you just had to give him 3 names. And in my case, I grew up in Colorado, so I wanted to go back to Colorado, and I didn't know much about the cities, but I picked out 3 cities, and one of the 3 happened to be Boulder, Colorado. And Sweeney took the list, and usually you were across the desk, you came in and told him your list, and he looked at my list and said, well, there's no debate, you want to go to Boulder, Colorado, that's where you want to go. And he said, just a moment. And so he gets, as I'm sitting there talking, he gets on the telephone, and he calls Ted Tedesco, who Ted had just been appointed city manager of Boulder, but had not moved yet from Enfield, Connecticut. And I heard one side of the conversation, but that was something, Steve Sweeney saying, I have a young man in my office that we'd like to place as an internship. He's done wonderful at school, a great record, and he would be a great addition to your staff there, and I'd like you to give him a job. And Tedesco said, okay. And I don't understand this. I mean, this is, you know, today from where we are, but this is how it was then. And so Ted said, okay, have him show up when he finishes his academic work there, and we'll put him to work in the city manager's office, and that'll work fine. And so a few months later, after I finished up, I go to Boulder, Colorado, and here I am ready to go to work, and I introduced myself for the first time to Ted Tedesco, who's now arrived and kind of become comfortable. But it's a great story from the standpoint of, and this is what I really preach to young people when I get a chance to preach, is that when you select that first job after graduate school, or you know, an early job in your career, much more important than the amount of money you're going to make, or the wonderful projects that you might be involved in, the most important thing is to select somebody to work for that you really can emulate and learn from. And you know, I had the great fortune of working with Ted Tedesco, and then my next job was with Larry Gish in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and Larry was president of ACMA, and Ted was a vice president, and these were really well thought of people in the profession, and I learned so much from that exposure that served me well. But that whole internship just made such an impression on me, and I know is the foundation for whatever success that I was able to have in this profession later. That's a long story, but it's wonderful
Great
stuff
story.
to start thinking about and reflecting on.
Tell us more about what happened in that internship in Boulder.
Oh, the Boulder experience was wonderful. I was there with I think 3 other fellows who were also from other schools who were part of a formal internship in Boulder. And so
Let me interrupt you just for one sec, because I wanted to ask this before.
Sure.
Not that you have to tell us the 11 schools that at that time
Right.
were touted to be so good.
Yeah.
But can you just to give us an idea of how, I guess this is the mid-'60s?
Yeah, this would be
Which
mid to
schools-
late 60s. Yeah,
Schools would have at that time been touted as.
right. Well, I can't remember them all. The University of Kansas, obviously, which still is one of the premier schools across the country. I remember the State University of New York at Albany was one of the schools that I looked at. Case Reserve University in Cleveland. Those are the ones I
Okay.
can remember.
Okay.
And quite frankly, the offer from Fels was such a wonderful offer, and you know, I really didn't debate too much once all that started to happen, but
Okay.
those were the schools.
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, that's
Take
fine.
us back to Boulder.
That's fine. Yeah, the internship in Boulder, as I was saying, it was I was thrown in with 3 other fellows from different schools. I think a couple of them were KU people, and then one from some other school in the same situation. We were all kind of working on an internship arrangement. We did a couple of things. We were formally assigned to the city manager's office, but the assistant city manager was also in charge of the budget director. And so we worked, when budget season was there, we worked extensively on the budget, going out, meeting with departments, working with them, trying to put the budgets together. And the second thing was then we would do special projects that would come along that the manager would like some folks to jump in and get accomplished. And the experiences were just really a vast array of experiences that I think set me up very well later in my career as I reflected on it. And I'll give you some examples of some of the things that, I mean, just kind of fun things that you were involved in. And the city manager was really, Ted Tedesco, was very committed to the internship program, and he would periodically, every week or two, he would bring us all into his office, and we would talk about things that were happening in the city, and we had an opportunity to ask him why he did a certain thing and why he was approaching this the way he was approaching it. And so it was a very congenial atmosphere, and one which we felt very open to dialogue with him, and he was very sharing about what he was up to, and wasn't guarded or anything. It was a very open situation. And he gave you very responsible tasks. Several things that I recall that I was able to do. We worked on an election campaign. The city, when I was there, passed a sales tax, a 1-cent sales tax, 60% earmarked for the street system, but 40% earmarked to buy the mountain backdrop in Boulder, the Greenbelt area that really, preserved that area and really set Boulder up, because when I was there, we were starting to see homes kind of gradually go up the mountain and intrude upon that open space. And so this was an initiative to give the city money to actually go out and buy the backdrop, which it did, and even then money in later years to do a lot of the Greenbelt acquisition down in the valley along some of the streams and so forth. So a very meaningful project, and one that had lasting impact. And I didn't do much other than kind of worked on the campaign and was part of it and saw it and got caught up, I think, in what a city really could do that would make an impact on the citizens for years and years and years, forever, really.
Was that an innovation for Boulder at that time?
I think
at that
so.
time?
Were
they creating a model for that, or were they following somewhere else?
No, it was pretty well. I think there was a real outcry within the community, knowing that we needed to do something to stop this erosion of one of the assets that really made Boulder Boulder. And so this program was put together, and I think in a pretty inventive way. We try to do that now. You try to get various interest groups willing to support tax increases, and by mirroring the transportation with the open space, you brought various elements together to support this, and it, as I recall, was a fairly decisive election, and set that funding that allowed that program to happen. So that was one I got to witness. We were there when they were doing the plan for downtown Boulder that eventually led to the closing of the streets and creating the Boulder Mall, which is still there today, a very successful pedestrian mall, which spoke to the decline in that area and so forth. And those were projects I mostly, I guess, kind of watched and saw develop, but got to be in there. And then got to personally do some things. One of the this was the time, the late '60s was the Vietnam era in that the country was going through, and a place like Boulder was a real hotbed for this, because and the city government, quite frankly, was caught right in the middle, because you had the university folks and students who tended to not support the war, be pretty liberal. Boulder was one of the hippie centers, and so you would have hippies, as we called them back then, hanging out and doing things, and so you had that group, and then you also had a group of very conservative store owners who expected any time somebody sat in front of their store that didn't look too good, they expected city government to move them along, and so city government was really caught in that. How do you deal with this in a community where you've got such extreme feelings concerning lifestyles and support for the war, protest against the war, whatever. So we were right in the middle of all that, and Ted gave us very meaningful assignments. I mean, I think back, one of the things that I was assigned to do, and I guess this is okay, I kind of chuckled about it as I reflected on it, but one of the things that we had was the work-study program through the federal government, and we were able to bring university students in to do work for the city at that point, and then the federal government paid most of their salary. We contracted, I think, with the university to get a certain number of students and then place them out in various assignments. Well, one of the groups that I was assigned to kind of oversee were kind of a group of people that were kind of on the fringe, and their role was they were to keep us informed about what was happening in, quote, the hippie community. So we kind of could keep our arms around it, know what was going on, know if there were problems that we needed to put the antennas up and try to deal with, and so on and so forth. So that was one of my roles, to oversee that program and to work with those group of students and make sure that we were getting good information and they were doing appropriate things and so on and so forth. So, so that was
Tell us
one.
a little bit more about that, because that's an interesting role
Yeah.
for the city government to take up at that time.
Yeah,
and
it
to
certainly was.
Bring in informants in that
Right,
way.
yeah, and
Were they, was it trying to track sort of the political activities of students, or?
yeah, and it was not. It was more just to keep our arms
informed.
around kind of what was going on. I mean, if there was going to be a protest march
Demonstration.
or something like that, I mean, we might get early word that that was going to happen and could kind of prepare and not be caught off guard, or if there was a conflict situation developing we needed to know about. I remember one time going out, I was invited to go to lunch by the fellow that worked for me that was kind of the head guy of this group. And we went to lunch, and we went to, I can't remember, but it was something like, here's Fat Bart or something. I mean, it was a very different lifestyle. They weren't using last names or anything, and it was people today, I don't. Going through all of that.
Did you get a majority against the bonds, or what? I mean,
I can't remember whether they got a majority or if they didn't even get a majority, but they certainly didn't get 2/3, which is what they required.
At that time, there was bicentennial fever, and HP was just coming on the scene with Main Street programs and so on and so forth. So was the county a partner in this discussion and downtown revitalization from the beginning? Or was it a surprise that they would,
Right.
was it a change of heart for them?
No, not really. The county, there were 3 county commissioners, none being from Liberty. And they were very happy to be able to move to the outskirts of Liberty. And if they could have moved out of the city, if the state law would have allowed them to, they would have been happy to do that. We were not the population center. We were the old-time city that had been the traditional county seat, and these were people that had no political alliance with us at all. They had brought a county administrator on for the first time, and he and I kind of dialogued and worked together, but he was very dependent upon the political support of the county commissioners. I mean, it was a very political type situation. So he did what he could, and he was a good ally to have, but he could only do so much. But the county was not a partner in this. I mean, we tried to consult, we tried to make sure they were kept up to date, but they really weren't very interested.
in the outcome, how did your relationship with the county administrator turn out?
Turned out fine. We were able to, once the county, we defeated the one issue, they got the thing approved in downtown Liberty, then we were able to work out some agreements where we worked together and did some joint stuff between our new building and theirs, and really made it much more attractive and much more functional. And so that was, if I'd had to work with the county commissioners, that would have been very difficult. But he was another professional, and we were able to get that done.
Mm-hmm. What did you learn from that experience in terms of, I'm sure when we get up to Chandler, a lot of these things are going to come up
Sure,
again.
sure.
It sounds like this was the first time you're faced with that situation of what is a downtown and what are the core values of a
Right.
city that's growing and changing.
Right.
How would you describe, not so much the campaign, but what it was you think you were really campaigning for?
Yeah, you know, and this may be overstating, but I think we felt, and I still feel, I mean, you're almost campaigning for the soul of the community. That if we could just envision, if you extract all of these county employees from the downtown, if you have an empty county building sitting there, maybe very underutilized, no commitment on the part of the county to the downtown. A lot of the, obviously, some of these stores were dependent upon the employees and the jurors that would come down for trials and so on and so forth. Take all that away, how's it going to affect the store owners? And, you know, and like I say, this, in most communities in which I've worked, I mean, the downtown represents the community. When people think about Liberty, they think about the square. They think about downtown Liberty. That's, you know, that's the birthplace of the community. That's where it started, and that's where people focus on. And, you know, some way we were able to mobilize the citizenry, that people really bought into that this is going to really, if we allow this to happen, the fabric of this community is going to be harmed to such a degree that it's not going to be the same place. And we were able to, that message really came across, and it, I don't know, an active downtown and one that's, you know, that's vital and really has the activity level. That says to me a lot about the community and kind of what, you know, you think of some of these communities you drive through where you got boarded up downtowns and sleepy places, and you kind of, you know, what is this community all about anyhow if it allows this to happen? And so it's the birthplace, it's the focus, it's what people think about when they think about a community. And so you gotta give it that kind of attention.
Any other major things happen in Liberty, or should we move on to Denton?
Yeah, I think that was by far the biggest activity in Liberty. We did some, obviously, we built that city hall, which I'm very proud about, and made a temporary move where we moved all the city stuff to an abandoned school, and we set up City Hall shop for a year in an abandoned school, and then moved back to our new building, and that was all really exciting. But you know, it all centered once again around the downtown. Oh, let me.
No, I don't need to switch tapes, but I do need to take a little.
Oh, okay.
That was the first real, how do you deal with this, and how do you have a conversation?
Absolutely,
And,
absolutely. Yeah, it's a fun time.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I think we're going to move on to Denton. And
Can I do one more thing about
Oh, I'm
this?
sorry.
A little more at Liberty.
Because I think it illustrates something that young people might find
Please.
interesting. One of the other things that happened in Liberty, once again a story, but Liberty was served, or the water supply came from some wells that sat along the Missouri River, and that's where we got our water. And one time it developed that as they were doing samples of our water supply, that we found traces of think it's TCE. I hope I remember that correctly after all these years. Hard to believe I can forget that. But we found traces of this in our water supply. And we got very concerned, and we traced it back to this old chemical plant that had closed years and years ago, and we were getting seepage into the groundwater system, and we were drawing this TCE now into our water supply. And so we went to the state and notified them and worked through EPA. And the bottom line was that we were assured that yes, there were trace amounts of this in the water, and the city needed to take some remedial action, but that the levels that were found were not detrimental to anybody's health, and it was all right for the city to continue to use the water. We just needed to deal with the problem, and so we were doing it. Well, we had one of the newspaper reporters that, you know, some newspaper reporters, you know, their mission in life is to sensationalize, and you know, we as city officials were now trying to calm everybody. We've got this under control. Don't worry about it. Here's our plan. It's not detrimental to your health, and so on and so forth. And so this newspaper reporter writes a story for the Kansas City Star, front page story about Liberty's water supply. And in the story, kind of the top headlines or the top little blurb is, she says she contacted the top official from EPA and asked whether, if he was a citizen in Liberty, if he would drink the water or not. And this official said he could not comment on that. And so she played it up. This guy wouldn't assure Liberty citizens it was safe to drink the water. Well, we followed up and come to find out that what the official had said, he said no, he couldn't comment on that it was not within his jurisdiction, and he needed to contact the state health people, and they would be happy to comment on the question that was asked. Of course, she didn't put that in. You know, it was, no, this top EPA official wouldn't say he would drink this water. And so, as a city manager, again, two lessons that came about with that. First, I was devastated. You know, I could just imagine the Liberty citizens just coming apart over this, and this panic mode setting in to the community in which we would have to deal with. And it turned out that it didn't hardly make a blip. You know, that, you know, despite my fears, front page story and everything, the Liberty citizens seemed to react okay and see this for what it was. So don't overreact. Most people probably aren't going to pay any attention to what the newspaper says anyhow. So don't take it too seriously. But secondly, that was the only, well, one of the only times that I've ever called kind of the editor of the newspaper to complain about a reporter. But I think occasionally, if somebody does something, in my mind, this was completely unethical. This was, you know, this is just beyond the bounds of even wouldn't suggest fair reporting. So you got to move beyond that. But that, once again, you know, we kind of, sometimes in this profession, we always take things too personal. And we think, gosh, this is happening, this is going to be terrible. How can this community live with it? And I think some of that probably matures out of you as you become older and get more experiences. But back in my younger days, and I'm sure younger days now, things happen that you put so much importance on, but they're not really that important. It'll work out. So anyhow, that's just a funny story, I guess.
Yeah, paint picture too. You want to talk about the picture?
Oh, yeah. Do you want to tell us about the gift of the watercolor?
Oh yeah,
that's behind you?
it's ironic that we're sitting here in my living room and behind me, and in a prominent place in our house always. We have an original watercolor that was done by Jim Hamill, who is an artist who works for Hallmark Cards and is a Liberty resident. And this watercolor was commissioned by the Liberty community as kind of a going away gift for Nancy and me when we departed Liberty. So there was this big community celebration. Gifts were given, a lot of nice things were said. The community really extended itself to express regards for our work in Liberty, and this is a treasured piece that will keep forever in a very prominent place.
Well, I noticed in another room in the house, there was also something that maybe was given to you by the people of Denton.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I think we referred to it earlier about the love you have of communities, and certainly in the 4 communities in which I had the honor of being manager. I mean, we love those communities, and I mean, we'll always remember them very fondly. And luckily, and this is a knock on wood. I mean, seeing things that happen. I mean, I was so lucky in my career to have 4 wonderful experiences, never having, lost a job, never having to go through that many people have. And like I say, it was not any skill level or anything else. It was the luck of the draw. I happened to work for good councils. Issues worked themselves out for the most part. And so I was fortunate. And so maybe that's part of the reason I feel so good about all 4 of those communities. But I certainly do.
Let me ask you a question about that you mentioned that when you went back to Liberty, you had gone to undergraduate school there.
Yes.
So you had some familiarity with that place and experience. What kind of role do you think knowledge of a place does play, and the history of a place plays in the role of a city manager? Because I think you're
Sure.
going to go on to a community, the next 2 communities that you probably don't have prior experience with.
Right.
So the extent to which you can just kind of insert
Sure.
professional management in any place you go, as
Sure.
opposed to having a sense of what this community is about.
Sure. To be honest, my exposure to Liberty was 4 years as an undergraduate student. So, I probably didn't know. I knew the community very superficially. Knew a little bit about what it was about, but I don't think there was anything I gained from that 4 years there in that city that really helped me as manager, other than, it was able to open the doors with some Liberty connected people that the administrative staff who knew I was a Jewel graduate, and maybe there was a little more willingness to work on joint projects together, or some of my really favorite professors who still were in the community and I was able to establish a relationship with. But other than that, not really. And I think that's one of the things that, one of the joys of our profession, I think, is that I'm a true believer that it is helpful for a manager to go to a new place every, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And I say that because one of the advantages is you coming from the outside, you're able to see that community with a new set of eyes. And you see things that person that's been born and raised in that community drives by every day and thinks, this is just fine. There is no problem here. It's always been here, so on and so forth. And a new set of eyes coming in, looking critically at the city for opportunities to make it better, I think is a real advantage for our profession. And some people have not gone that route, and I think that's fine. But I think there is an advantage to bring the fresh eyes in.
When that happens and you arrive and you have no experience, then how do you come to have a sense, how do you create for yourself a sense of identity with the community? How do you become involved in it so that it becomes, you feel a part of it, you feel that it's your home?
Sure. Yeah, the first 6 months into a job is a very, in my opinion, needs to be a very, very intense time period. One of the things that I did, I think I did this in Nevada's case, I remember, making sure that I walked completely around the square and introduced myself to all the store owners and struck up a conversation with them and found out what was going on, and then became very active in the community, joined Rotary Club, and so I went up. Nevada had the old timers that met for coffee every day at 9 o'clock at the local cafe, and I would go down there three and four times a week, and to become involved in the community and really plug in and know what was going on. So you just extend yourself. When I know I did this. I don't know if I did it in Liberty, but I know I did it in Nevada and in Chandler. I formally went to each of the council people and said, if I want to learn about the community, give me 10 names of people that I really need to sit down and talk with, that would really know this community and what makes it tick and what's important to it and so on and so forth. And so then I compiled that list, and then for the next 6 months, I would be having lunch and coffee and dinner with all the people on those lists, the people that the council at least had told me these are the people that know what's going on. And then to extend myself as well. But you're right, you've got to work as an outsider very hard to quickly get your arms around the community and what its values are and what's important to it. Spend a lot of night hours at City Hall kind of going through the old files, city manager files, and major projects that were ongoing and what the background for those and so on and so forth. So, I think that's a very perceptive question, because you do have to work at that very rapidly. You can't, you can't be seen as kind of this outsider that's coming in, imposing his view and his values on the community. It's got to be, you come in, you find out about the values, what makes the community tick, and then you contribute, hopefully, to kind of move the ship, the right way.
Is that the same with city staff, in terms of understanding what the culture of a city's?
Yes. I think much less than the city manager. I mean, the city manager...
I'm sorry, I meant in terms of when you introduce yourself, you come into Liberty as a city manager, and now you have this new workforce.
Sure.
And you need to learn about their culture.
Absolutely. You need to, besides the outside folks, you got to spend a lot of time with staff people. And you've got to earn their trust. Mm-hmm. I mean, you've got to, you can't come in and say, now here I am, I'm in charge, and we're going to do it my way. It's got to be, you come in and you try to learn, and you try to make sure that you do things to earn their respect and earn their respect as a professional, and try to establish those relationships internally as well as externally.
Mm-hmm. What would be a mechanism for getting to know staff in the same way for the public community? You said you would go to council and get names. How would you make those same kind of inroads with your new employees?
Right. One of the things that I always did is very quickly, like within the first couple weeks on the job, I would block out like a half day to a day. And if you were the fire chief, I'd come and say, hey, I want you to teach me everything you think I need to know about the fire department. So let's go, and you take me wherever you think I need to go, introduce me to whomever I need to be introduced to, but I want you, this is your day, and help me start to assimilate what your department's all about. And I would do that with every department. And so that would be by the first month I'd been on the job, I had done that with everybody. And I started to introduce myself to employees and try to get out in the organization. But it's something you need to work on. I mean, it obviously just doesn't happen. So you've got to make the extension and make sure that it takes place.
Mm-hmm. How about in terms of if in that first month you really see you've got personnel changes that need to be made. How do you approach that?
Yeah, well, I would never do anything the first month, but, you know, because I always feel that I really need to see somebody operate and how they perform, and if you make a change, that's a pretty drastic thing in somebody's life to have to do. So I want to give everybody an opportunity to do that, and so, you know, I would watch very closely for the first 6 months or so when I was on the job. I would spend a lot of time with department directors one-on-one talking about expectations. How do I expect them to operate? What are some goals that we expect to get accomplished, and so on and so forth, to make sure that was clearly set out, so that if 6 months from now there is a change that I have to make, we've given somebody every opportunity to perform up to our expectations, and make sure there's no misunderstanding. And then if you have to make a change, I always could live with myself to know that, yeah, we did it, but it was in the best interest of the city to do, and we gave this person, you know, a number of chances to make sure he or she could fit in and perform, and we just can't do it, so we got to make a change and we got to move on. But you know, luckily I was never in a situation where I came in where the council said, you know, you got to make this change and this change, and they always left that to me. If they were concerned, they would let me know about it, but it was my decision, and I was able to work under that situation.
Doesn't sound like you've come into situations where, knowingly, where there's like a demoralized staff or, you know, inherited
Right.
negative
Yeah.
personnel situations, or you haven't alluded to that so much.
Right. I mean, that's not been a major thing. I mean, some have been more than others, but yeah. I
have
mean,
been fortunate.
I've never walked into an organization that was completely down in the dumps
Right.
and had been, you know, gutted or something, and I had to build it back up. I've never had to do that.
Okay, let's move on to Denton.
Okay.
And I don't want to hurry you, but
That's
we
fine.
have to move it a little bit because
That's fine.
we're anxious to get into Chandler,
That's fine. Yeah.
because we
we're gonna
have
get
a
there.
little time constraints here.
Okay.
Okay.
Denton, Texas. Denton is once again, it's a county seat city. Seem to pick county seat cities, up until I came to Chandler anyhow. So it was a county seat city, once again a university community, had two universities, North Texas State and, or then North Texas State, now the University of North Texas, and Texas Women's University, which is the largest women's university, public women's university in the country, and sits right between Dallas and Fort Worth. So there are two interstate highways going to either city. And so again, kind of an independent city, but close to a very big metropolitan area. I made the switch to Denton. Once again, you know, I'd been in Liberty 7 years plus. Kind of looked for kind of a new challenge and new things to do. Denton was a community at that point of about 70,000 people. Went
This is
to
about 1985?
yeah, this would have been, yeah, about that
that?
time
Okay.
frame, 1985. And went to Denton. Probably one of the reasons that I was attractive to the Denton people was that I'd worked on, you know, downtown project very successfully in Liberty. They had some real challenges with their downtown. That probably was one of the things that got my foot in the door for the Denton job. Went there, competed for the position, and was offered the job, and went to Denton, Texas. Once again, kind of followed our course. I went ahead. Nancy came later with the kids. At that point, we had one of our daughters that was still at home. She was a I guess it would have been a ninth grader, and so it was kind of a decision in our family that if we're going to move, we needed to move now, not after she got into high school. And so we made the decision that, and that's one of the things that prompted us to say it was time to leave Liberty if we were going to. So we made the move to Denton.
Okay, so take us through your challenges there.
Besides the downtown, which we worked on, really hard when we were there, we were able to get kind of the Main Street model introduced in Denton, followed that same model on through, and did a lot of public improvements to the downtown square in Denton. Looked at, it was into the growth mode, so we built a lot of things. We, acquired substantial new parkland. One of the things that I look back in Denton with great pride, not only the downtown, but there was a piece of property that was in South Denton that had been repossessed by the RCP or whatever. We were trying to talk about that this morning, but the federal agency that had taken over property after it had been foreclosed upon. And this property was sitting there in Denton, and developers were trying to work with the federal agency to get that property released for development. And one of the things that I was really proud about was that, and I tried to do this kind of behind the scenes and everything, but to work with the city council, work with the federal agency, and get the majority of the council to say it was a good idea for the city to step out and buy this fairly large piece of property sitting in the middle of South Chandler, and get that accomplished. And today it's one of the, there are two really kind of regional parks in Chandler, and this is one of them, or in Denton, and this is one of them. And it's one of those things that you never tout, and managers can't tout this, but because there are all kinds of people that work to make things happen. But I know in my heart, and this is what makes this profession so wonderful, because I know in my heart that park would not be there if I hadn't pushed that idea and gotten that idea sold to the council. It just wouldn't have happened. And that's a wonderful thing about our profession, that you're able to look back on those kind of things and know that, at least in part because of your effort, things happened in that community that made it a better place that citizens from now on will be able to enjoy. And so I think often fondly about things like that were wonderful. That community also had its own electric system, so I got involved in that for the first time and learned about power plants and transmission lines and all of the things that you have to be involved in when you run your own electric system. So that was fun as well.
Does it still run its own electric system?
Still running its own electric system. Sure is.
So it's akin a little bit to what Mesa does?
Except this was citywide. I mean,
Okay.
where Mesa does for their just downtown area. We had our own power plant. We jointly owned a plant with 4 other cities that had their own electric systems, and would pipe the power in through big transmission lines. And so it was, very big business besides just the normal government stuff that we're involved in.
In any of these experiences in either Stillwater or Nevada or Liberty or Denton, did your experience as an intern, when you talked about trying to have the police and fire work together in innovative ways, did you have a chance to see that happen in any of these other communities?
No, it never happened, and probably lessons
Has it
that I
ever happened
learned.
anywhere?
But when those ideas were brought up, and they never were real serious in any of those communities. I hearken back to some things that happened. The thing about Denton, once again, not to prolong this, but you think about things that influenced you. In Denton, one of the things that happened was that we were going through some budget problems. And we had made a decision that we had some overlap in fire stations. And if we closed the downtown station, we had enough overlap that we could provide really good coverage and still save the city a substantial amount of money. And we got that sold through the council, and the council bought off on it, despite some objections from the downtown people and some objections from the firefighters and so on and so forth. The council stood in there and they said okay, and they would do it. And that decision was made, and probably not more than 6 months after that decision was made, I'll never forget the phone call I got one night at 3 o'clock in the morning saying that a quarter of the downtown square was burning, and I probably needed to get down there. And it had nothing to do with closing this fire station, but there is now another fire station in downtown Denton. It works. Things work out that way, and so again, you think at the time, it's another example. At the time, oh, it's terrible, and this world's going to come crashing, but somehow works out fine.
Right.
Works out fine. And the other thing, an interesting thing in Denton, just reminiscing, I had the interest in Denton to work with a mayor that had been a $10 million winner in the Publishers Clearinghouse in the sweepstakes. And so this was Bob Castleberry, and he was a long-time bachelor, never been married, and he won. He got elected after he'd won the $10 million.
He was well known then.
Retired, everybody knew him. He had been born and raised in Denton. He ran for mayor, got elected, and so it was very interesting working with him we worked together for like 6 years, and really a nice guy and wonderful, but you think people don't know who wins the Publishers Clearinghouse till you go to an airplane terminal or something, and people were stopping and introducing themselves to him, and he had he gave us the directions that the city was not to open his mail. We never could understand why that was. We'd bring it up to him all sealed, and he would open his own mail. And come to find out that there were a number of women that would write to him because he was $10 million, he'd been a bachelor, and he was just embarrassed about these letters. So anyhow, just funny stories that happened to him.
There was a question I had before we move on to Chandler. Are each of the places that you're working, are they kind of similar demographics for the various places, or are you meeting the needs of different kinds of citizens as you move from place to place?
I would guess the demographics in Liberty and Denton were fairly comparable. Nevada would have been a little less wealthy community. I mean, it would have been a rural area that was going through some economic pains and so on and so forth, where both Denton and Liberty tended to be suburban communities that were growing fairly rapidly and had a pretty good, both the two had universities, county seats, so on and so forth.
So there's some similarities.
Similarities, absolutely.
So it seems like quite a departure when you make the shift to Chandler. So tell us about what it is you're taking on, and
sure.
Also a little bit about, if you would, whether at that point the idea of managing a city in Arizona had any particular resonance because of the reputation of Arizona City.
Sure. Yes, I was in Denton for almost 10 years before I left, and again, kind of came to the conclusion, well, I'd like another challenge in my career, and luckily all of my moves were really voluntary, and I made the decision it was time to go, and I did so in Denton as well. And yes, I looked at Arizona, Chandler. Once again, I probably got acquainted with Chandler through an advertisement in the ICMA newsletter, and it was about the size of community that I was interested in. Arizona did have some pull, although I must tell you that prior to coming to Chandler, you know, I'd never been in the community previously. I'd only been to Arizona, I think, one other time, and that was to an ICMA convention in Phoenix. So I certainly didn't have any association with the state. I did know about several of the managers. Terry Zirkle at the time was the manager of Tempe. Terry had worked as an assistant in Arlington, Texas, so I knew Terry. And one of the things that I did as I was checking out Chandler is I called Terry and really talked to him a lot about the community and what made it tick and so on and so forth. Knew generally of the good reputation of the Phoenix metropolitan area. I mean, as far as Phoenix obviously has a wonderful reputation for the council manager form of government. And so it was a place that I was very comfortable in, you know, looking at the opportunities and the growth that was happening and thinking this would be an exciting place in which to work.
Tell us, if you could try to characterize quickly what Chandler in 1995, I guess it is.
Yeah. Chandler was a community at that point that was, I think stick in your mind, but it was 125,000 people. And today we're here 10 years later and it now is over 225,000. So, and even at that time, I mean, the boom had already started. I mean, there was just tremendous growth that was going on in this community with nothing on the horizon to tell you that anything would be different. I mean, I knew walking in that I would be scrambling from the moment I arrived just to try to keep up with what needed to be done to keep this really a good community and adequate public facilities and so on. Growth was at the forefront, and throughout my tenure in Chandler, it was growth-related issues that predominated our discussion. No doubt about it. So that was and is and continues to be the big thing in this community.
So at that time, and maybe it still is, in the top 5 fastest growing cities in the nation?
Right, absolutely. That's exactly where it was.
Did that require then a special kind of expertise or a special kind of person to come in who was interested in those kinds of growth issue challenges?
I think so. I mean, again, I think, to speak very honestly, one of the things that attracted Chandler to me was, once again, experience with downtowns, because that was on the plate of the Chandler community too, that we wanted to do some work in the downtown area. So that was certainly an attraction that I think, and something I had to sell, and I was excited to be able to do that again. And someone in 1995 could not have walked into this job without having a lot of high energy. I mean, you had to know this was not the place you were coming to retire. You weren't just going to move in and work a couple years and then say, well, now I can formally retire. I mean, you knew you were going to really be working hard and spending a lot of hours. There were going to be a lot of issues you had to deal with. The one saving thing in all this is, what happens is as you move up in city size, the sophistication of your city staff becomes more and more and more. And so there are less things that you obviously have to do yourself, but you need to develop different kind of skills. You need to develop the skills to be able to select good people. and the skills to be able to translate the desires of the council to the staff, and the ability to translate the needs of the staff back to the council, and be that kind of middle person in between that's so important for a successful manager. And so your role really does change. And so it's not so much you got to go out and do the things, but you got to make sure you're hiring the right people and that they know what they're doing and that you're monitoring things closely enough and that things continue to get accomplished. So it's a different skill level as you mature and as the city size and sophistication increases.
How do you deal with the issue that Nancy raised earlier then, when you look at the staff? This is not a staff that you might look at then that's incompetent, that somebody would be incompetent in their position.
Right.
But the city's growing and changing, and people need to become more sophisticated
Right.
in how they approach their positions. So as a manager then, how do you think differently about it beyond just, gee, this person is, before might not be doing a great job, but now the person is doing a good job, but the city's changing around them. So how do you help people grow, and how do you work with staff that way?
Well, you do a couple of things. I mean, obviously, I've been a big proponent of training and development, and all of our, I think if you want to keep up and you want to be doing good things, that you've got to give your people the skill level and the resources that they're able to accomplish that. So I think you do that. The other thing that I really found helpful, and I probably wasn't doing this when I was in Nevada, maybe not even Liberty, but over the years I kind of developed a real belief in kind of what I guess I would call team management. I really worked hard to structure the system so that all of us together as the city staff, we were making decisions together to kind of move the city forward. So, and I use examples that when I did the budget process to the council, the city charter in both of those cities gives the manager the power to propose the budget to the council. I always involve the department directors in making decisions together as a team on what we included in the budget and what we didn't and what we recommended to the council. When we hired a major department director, all of the other city department heads were involved in that hiring process. Got to interview people, got to talk to them, got to give me formal evaluations. So everything, not everything, but you really try to extend yourself, or I believed in trying to extend myself to create this atmosphere that we're a management team and we're all in this together. And if police chief's got a problem, it's all of our problems. It's not just his problem or her problem. And really I found that philosophy really to serve me well. And a lot of people look at it as, when I talk to young people now, and when I teach some courses, we talk about, here's a case where you think you're really giving up power. Because I got the power to hire and fire department heads. I've got the power to give the budget to the council. The department directors, they don't have any formal power, and so you think you're giving it up. But what you're really doing is you're empowering yourself. Because when you do that, it comes back so many times over that things pay off for you. And people need to learn to do that. That it's that sharing, and it's bringing other people into the system. And the other thing about it is I always made better decisions that way. I always found, when I look back, I might have had a police chief candidate I thought was just crackerjacks. And if I just made that decision in isolation, that would have been the person I hired. But if I have the ability to listen to a lot of other people, I've always found, for the most part, group decision-making is much better than an individual's decision-making. And so if you get a lot of people looking, a lot of people making comments, I found anyhow that usually the decision is better when it finally is made.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the downtown area and try
Yeah.
to characterize what the situation was when you came and what kind of tools you used.
Sure,
Because
sure.
I think in addition to the Main Street, which
Right.
had worked elsewhere,
Right.
you had some other tools that you used here.
Yeah, Chandler was in a little different place in that it doesn't have some of the historic buildings that some of the other cities in which, because it's a new city, really, in the big scheme of things. But in many ways, it's got a similar characteristic. This is where Chandler was founded. This is where A.J. Chandler came and built the San Marcos Hotel and really designed kind of the first kind of city beautiful in Arizona with a master plan and went about implementing that. And so, when I came in '95, the San Marcos Hotel had been closed for a number of years. It had just opened a couple years previously. It was still kind of coming back from that, being kind of some renovation. The downtown had really not been the focus of attention. People, had talked about it a little bit, but it really hadn't been the focus. And so, we were able to participate in the formation of a downtown property owners association, really for the first time, a really active one that got involved, brought some other community people from Ocotillo and from Intel, and others got them involved in that effort, so it became more of a community effort than just a store owner type thing. We did a substantial amount of public improvements in the downtown. One of the things that the previous councils had done, and then we continued, it was a very innovative program, I think, of rather than building a city hall, what the city did on one occasion before I got there, and then one occasion when I was manager, is to prompt employees to come to the downtown area. The city sent out RFPs for a new office building, and as an inducement, guaranteed that we would lease for a period of 10 years 2 floors in that office building. And that prompted one new office building built in downtown Chandler. And then, as I said, subsequently, when that 10 years was up, we did it again and got a second new office building. And buildings that would have never been, I'm convinced, would have never been built without the inducement that the city was able to do of saying, well, we'll guarantee, 2/5 of the floors will be occupied, and that's going to take a lot of your risk out. And so we were able to do that, and that brought a lot of employees down. We started for the first time, and it's under construction now. We got some new housing going on in the downtown area. It was not thought about before. So, I think, when you work on downtown projects, one of the things you soon learn is this is not a quick project. This is a chip by chip by chip, and pretty soon, things start happening and you start seeing things. But you always have to preach to councils that this will not happen quickly. We've got to be in this for the long term. And I think Chandler, now continues to make progress and go in the right direction.
So to a certain extent, it sounds like you're talking about city managers as a steward of the city, regardless of what can actually be accomplished while you're there.
Oh, yeah.
And so it seems to me that would take an extraordinary kind of person, and also very, not that many people would want to make that type of long-term investment without some sort of immediate gratification. Your payoff can come way after you've
Right.
served in a place.
Yeah, one of the characteristics, I think, of city managers that I always tell young people when I'm talking to them is, if you're the kind of person that somebody needs to have your boss tell you on a fairly regular basis that you're really doing a good job, Nancy, you're really doing well, you probably don't belong in city management, because your satisfaction has to come primarily from within. You've got to be able to talk to yourself and know deep inside you that you're doing a good job. and what you did is important, and this is really going to help this community long range, because there aren't people standing in line to tell you what a good job you did. I mean, I can count on my hand. I mean, even though I was never fired, was always given good evaluations for the most part, you know, nobody, or very seldom did somebody come up and say, you really did really good job on that. So it's got to be this internal thing, and I think that carries through with how you look at projects, that you know it's the right thing to do, you know it's going to be important to the community. People might not recognize it, and they probably won't even recognize the role you play. But you know the role you play, and you know it's important. And if you can't get your satisfaction from that, you don't belong in this field. You belong someplace else, because it's not going to happen. You're not going to get a lot of reinforcements and pats on the back.
What were some of the other major challenges at the time from 1995 to 2002 was realizing the Chandler Fashion
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Center, a
Right,
major
yeah,
piece that you did?
oh, yeah, well, you know, a couple of things. The development was major. I mean, when I first came, the first Intel fab was under construction, had not been opened yet, and so I was here during the opening, and then subsequently was involved in the negotiations to bring the second fab to Chandler. And, you know, these are big things that people around the country can't. I mean, when you say, yeah, we got $1 billion project, $1 billion project, I mean, it's just kind of mind-boggling. And in Chandler, I think at one time we had $3 billion projects underway. One was Intel, Motorola was doing expansion, Microchip was doing something, and it was just, you know, like I said, it's kind of mind-boggling. So those kind of things you're continually working on. When I came to town, the West Corps had purchased the site for the mall, but it had sat there for a number of years. I mean, I think they held onto that property for something like 12 or 13 years before they started construction. And the council was clamoring, when is something going to happen, because of the importance of retail sales tax for our tax base. I mean, that's what drives it. And so we were involved a lot in meeting with West Corps each year, going to the shopping center convention in Las Vegas just so we could meet with West Corps and meet with other retailers, involved in working to speed up the construction of the 101, because that was key to, you know, that had to be here before West Corps was ready to break ground and start their project. And so the Fashion Square was really a big deal. When I got here, we were right in the midst of the argument with Tempe over the Mills Mall. And so, you know, I was involved in that, got to be involved when we did the revenue sharing agreement with Tempe to share revenue from the mall and I mean from the Mills project, and kind of put all that together, and then saw what happened in West Chandler, which was real exciting with all the retail development that occurred there. So it's been kind of a wild ride in Chandler. I tell other people, you know, I worked 30 years as a city manager, and as I think back on it, the 6 years that I spent here, we probably did 3 times as much building of city